origin of who we are as individuals is firmly grounded in where we have been physically, biologically, and relationally planted. I am me because of the tribe I form part of, because of the household, community, and society we as family unit occupy. Good day. I am Tamlynn Jane Roberths, and it is truly an honor for me to be here today, despite it being virtually, at today's conference, Seeking Hope. I know we've been waiting and working towards this conference for quite some time, and despite the fact that we can't be face to face with one another or have physical contact, being able to share with one another with the help of technology is still a grace. And so, the presentation that I will be delivering is entitled A Hope Encompassed in Trust and Legacy for Diverse Family Households on the Cape Flats and Areas of Urban Poverty. And the rationale of this conference presentation is to address the reality of diverse family households in South Africa in areas of urban poverty, such as the Cape Flats. I will further stretch towards determining how community environments entrenched or embedded in historical trauma and urban poverty affect relational well-being of said family households. By definition, diverse family households, or the term diverse families, refer to variations from the so-called, or is referred to in variation from the so-called traditional nuclear family. This implies that there was once or one type of best type of family, which in a sense in our contemporary terms is not so. Family diversity in fact refers to a broad range of characteristics or dimensions on which families vary but are still functional effectively. Family diversity thus refers to variations along structural or demographic dimensions. Herewith, the general objective is to seek out what could be utilized to establish hope for healthier, filial or family relational well-being despite immediate and imminent social-economic issues. To fulfill the above objective and to build clear theoretical meaning, I will make use of the theoretical framework known as the Dialogical Intergenerational Pastoral Process. With this, the relational resources of legacy and trust will be reflected upon as resources which could be used in order to cultivate healthier relational well-being and to strengthen filial bonds in diverse family households. In the South African context, both historical trauma and the current community trauma or social-economic problems also continue to affect family relations as well as family household structures. What has proven to be an even harsher reality is that the fact that the apartheid regime has left many with a deep-seated idea that the nuclear family household is the normative reality and should be something to strive towards. According to Hall 2018, the household, which is made up of mother and father with children, seemingly or superficially indicates a status of stability and privilege. What encouraged this specific research paper is the fact that I conducted an empirical study for my master's degree related to the following title: Exploring Trust and Loyalty Within Grandparent-Headed Families on the Cape Flats and the Impact of the Church as Social Support. Another reason why I have a deep interest in diverse family households and socio-economic circumstances is because I myself grew up on the Cape Flats, experiencing the good, the bad, and the uncertainty of this environment. The flat-lying area of the Cape Flats in the Western Cape on the southern tip of Africa could be compared to many other towns, suburbs in the world, encompassed with both wealth of beauty, land, diverse people, diverse cultures and communities, but also on the other hand, where the media has amplified and emphasized the horrific crime rate, the unemployment levels, the harsh living conditions, or chronic and cumulative trauma, and historical oppression and current socio-economic issues. And so the first section that I'll be discussing is a dissected perception of family within the South African context. You see, the concentrated area of research location discussed, which is the Cape Flats, is of course not the main focus of this paper, but it plays a large role in its importance. Our context as individuals and families are extremely prominent in the South African context because of our diverse cultures, ethnicities and religions, and how we lived through a rich history ruled by the apartheid regime, which meant that our diversities as human beings meant our divide because of an inhumane political system. This has changed with the end of apartheid and with the instatement of democracy. However, we still experience the remnants and the historical trauma of the past. Inevitably, it has affected everything we know as a diverse, colorful nation, even our perception and understanding of what a family is or what its definition is. In a multicultural, diverse society such as South Africa, there is no uniform definition for family. And the understanding of family and household is often used interchangeably. The perspective concerning this can be related to the reality of how Africans view humanity as a communal way of living, often embracing generational interconnectedness and regarding the individual as being part of a greater whole for past, present and future. Concepts such as Ubuntu, I am because we are, or Ubunye, we are one, denotes that humanity in South African context is often interlinked with relational ethics and family interconnectedness. In many African communities and for several Black South Africans, family is often not limited to the westernized definition of a nuclear family or even extended family. It even often surpasses space and time. And so according to Makwane and Kunda 2018, the diversity of family formation in Africa is clearly illustrated by the expansive definition of family in African family charters, which accommodate both the traditional African family and the emerging family forms. In Black South Africa, for instance, children are taken care of by an extended family member who are not necessarily even biological parents. And that said, in many instances, family is perceived in an intergenerational sense, including blood relatives, near and far, adoptive family members, relatives both alive and passed on, and others who are part of community. According to the Department of Social Development, approximately 80% of foster carers are extended family members. Making family by nature diverse and making it even more obvious that in South African context, family by definition is just as assaulted as our nation herself. A clear example of this came to light in the empirical study conducted with grandparents from grandparental families. The participants' definition of families could not necessarily be pinned down. Many definitions that were given by families or grandparents from grandparental families was said in an abstract sense. Some grandparents perceived family to be defined as strength and support. For others, family was a reminder of the existential reality, and that family should be those who show definite interest in one another's lives. Others shared that family meant that respect and communication could always be found there. And this is the reminder that as for caregivers or when in relation with families or individuals, we should be open to diversity. How our physical and cultural influences come into play. The next segment or section is disseminating the reality of historical trauma, cultural or current social economic issues in the face of households as a community unit. As beautiful as South Africa is as a country, we cannot ignore that trauma, specifically complex and collective trauma, is largely part of our history and continues even today. We have moved from the Cape frontier and colonization to the Anglo-Boer War to further violence, racism and conflict escalating in the times of segregation and then apartheid. Violent protests and events nationwide continued well after the first democratic elections and still continues to rear its ugly head in our communities today. A large segment of what affects families and how they perceive a family or household is defined by the lived experiences confronted by them on a daily basis. These lived experiences include not only what occurs in a home, but certainly what takes place around a home, in society, in community, and the institutions they find themselves in. Thus, the residential areas on the Cape Flats are not merely disadvantaged areas. These places of living were established in the time of apartheid, which in and of itself was a historical traumatic period. Many of the communities and the residential areas which came about on the Cape Flats were people and families forcefully removed out of the inner city of Cape Town. This occurred because of the Group Areas Act instated in 1968 by the apartheid government. And these new communities were made up of mixed race people, colored and black, with different cultures, different religions and customs. The areas on the Cape Flats were often named after areas that people previously were forcefully removed out of. And well into the 1980s, the communities were synonymous with violence, gangsterism and crime of every kind. According to ABLE 2015, the Group Areas Act and the establishment of the Cape Flats was a strategy to try and keep black South Africans disorientated, disorganized, with suffering and economically dependent, thus also creating communities who are in constant survival mode and trauma. And many families have remained living on the Cape Flats even after the apartheid regime has been eradicated, and many still struggle to get back the land they or their previous generation lived on. And so the Cape Flats environment is made up of black townships, coloured ghettos and shantytown, and was a breeding ground for historical trauma perpetuated and penetrated by the apartheid system. And the current social-economic issues faced largely stems out of the historical trauma endured, or as some would like to believe, historical amnesia, which causes hurt to involuntarily surface. Thus, the current socio-economic issues are experienced by both individuals and families as a revolving slate of some sort, a kind of transmission of injustice or a type of relational consequence. And our problems and challenges such as crime, acts of violence, gangsterism, substance abuse, unemployment and other forms of injustice. This was another theme which came about when conducting the empirical data from grandparents in grandparent-headed families. They were quite open to discuss the negative circumstances and social economic issues they, as grandparents, and their grandchildren face. And I remember around the time in 2019 was also the time that the army was deployed to the Cape Flats area because of gang violence, which had escalated to no avail. And even I remember driving in these areas feeling apprehensive and filled with tension, because as a civilian citizen we were expected to share the roads with massive army tankers. None of the grandparents were in denial about what occurs in their community on a daily basis. And because they had a strong sense of awareness, they often portrayed an even stronger sense of protectiveness when discussing the well-being of their grandchildren and the injustice and socio-economic issues and violence occurring in their communities. Many grandparents mentioned that they continuously reminded their grandchildren to stay away from negative influences in their communities. And there is no doubt that the exposure to continuous socio-economic challenges and community trauma not only creates tension and stress for grandparents, but grandparents also reported that it seems as though their grandchildren grew accustomed to community violence and have grown numb to the events of violence and crime. According to academic literature, specifically in South African context, this is not uncommon for children who have been exposed to violence at a young age. However, getting used to fights, seeing fights, gang violence and the sound of gunshots and being non-responsive is not at all a good thing. Exposure to community violence or criminal activity have grave mental consequences and could also mean that children experience extended periods of stress, depression or feelings of hopelessness. And this has adverse effects not only on individuals but also on families and the relational well-being of these families. So how do we as caregivers, or more specifically in my case pastoral caregivers, create a beacon of hope for families? Even more so, hope and guidance for diverse family types. How do we create a beacon of hope or provide them with tools to strengthen their often precious family bonds? The contextual therapy and relational ethics. Searching for a means to pastorally care for diverse family members or families such as grandparent-headed families and being in want to find something which would provide hope for these families and pastoral caregivers led me to the theoretical framework, the dialogical intergenerational pastoral process. The DIP, by acronym, within itself stems out of the contextual therapy and largely focuses on relational ethics. Whenever Ivan Bozomeni-Nagy, founder of contextual approach, uses the word context, he says that the organic thread of giving and receiving that weaves the fabric of human reliance and interdependence. The human context extends into a person's current relationships as well as past and future. It constitutes the sum of all the ledgers of fairness in which a person is involved. Its dynamic criterion is rooted in due consideration, not in a mutuality of give and take. And so Nagy perceives the four dimensions of contextual theory as undivided, which is objective facts, psychology, interactional and transactional, and finally the dimension of ethics or relational ethics. Relational ethics is the strongest dimension of these, and it is a reminder of an individual's responsibility within relations. Relational ethics emphasizes fairness and justice. Justice emphasizes the need for balance in relations with others. This balance is determined by what an individual is entitled to receive and what he or she is obligated to give in order to maintain the relationship. And this means I become aware of my natural injustice and how I contribute to justice in the relations I share with others. The goal of contextual therapy is to liberate families in their dialogue with each other to make sure entitlement is earned. There is a constant need for interpersonal trust achieved through caring, trustworthy deeds, and communication. Contextual therapy emphasizes ways in which family generations are bound to one another. People cannot be seen separately from their family roots or generational roots. Even simply stated in the article Resourcing Trust in a Fragmented World by Meilenkorf and Noordlander, relational ethics is defined as a motivational layer in which hope resides for repairing the hurt human justice. In this case, the human injustice are diverse family members or diverse families facing the experiences of historical trauma and socio-economic issues on a daily basis, and yet being deserving of at least having the hope and dignity spared by building strong and safe family relations. The following section is the dialogical intergenerational pastoral process, the bridge between pastoral theology and the contextual approach in South Africa. So the DIP, as I mentioned, the dialogical intergenerational pastoral process, is quite underrated in the field of theology and the subfield of pastoral care. Yet it deals with many grassroots and systemic issues which is witnessed in our current era. It encompasses principles needed to address justice, morality, and relational ethics, while simultaneously maintaining a relational focus, transgenerational perspective, and systemic insight. It includes the pertinent constructs of posterity, fairness, trustworthiness, accountability, and more specifically or importantly, relational ethics. And the aim with this theoretical framework is not to fix families or to fix family relations, but to achieve greater balance in relations. The attention is often placed on enhancing relational resources and stimulating growth for both present and future generations. And that's why it was so well fitted when working with grandparent-headed families in a pastoral capacity. The DIP has been molded and shaped by contextual therapy, philosophy, relational ethics, and theology in order to be considered a theoretical and pastoral process within caregiving, pastoral capacity, and ministry. And it continues to develop with the help of both South African scholars and scholars from abroad, who offer major contributions to this paradigmatic framework within pastoral theology. And it leans to an interplay between theology and human sciences. It is a reminder of and it appeals to the human responsibility towards the other. We all experience an innate internal sense of divine discomfort, as Emmanuel Levinas often reminds us in his writings on relational ethics. Divine discomfort is often expressed as responsibility as the image of God in man. And for these reasons and many others, pastoral theology and ministry found it complementary and necessary to consider the dialogical intergenerational pastoral process as a worthy theoretical framework. And so, cultivating hope for relational well-being, filial trust, and legacy as relational resource. As mentioned at the very beginning of the presentation, the objective is to seek out what could be utilized to establish hope for healthier family relational well-being, specifically for diverse family households in areas of urban poverty. And what better beacon of hope than to stimulate already present relational resources within families. Therefore, emphasizing trust and legacy as hope means seeking and reaching for a hope which is self-reliant and offering relational resources which are resilient within families. Trust and legacy are resources embedded in who we are as individuals, but even more so embedded as who we are as family and our true relational reality. And I specifically saw this when working with grandparents from grandparent-headed families. Trust as a resilient, reciprocal, and responsible resource within families. By definition, trustworthiness or trust flourishes in the presence of reliability, responsibility, reciprocity, and realistic trust between people. Moreover, trust experienced by another person is no guarantee that the trusted partner is ethically virtuous, however. Trust is a vital relational resource which is experienced between people and is an ever-present reality between family members. Whether it is there in the form of mistrust or trust, it is inescapable. And participants in this study held varied perspectives of what trust means to them and how it is experienced in everyday life within their families. Certain participants reported that trust meant being open and transparent through means of communication. Others perceived trust as members of family being trustworthy with one another and speaking truth or not stealing from each other. Participants also shared that trust meant cultivating an understanding between family members through constant communication and taking responsibility for the relationships they share. Overall, trust was deemed as a matter of giving and receiving between family members. Without a strong sense of trust and navigating and cultivating healthy relationships within any family would be impossible. Trust between grandparents and grandchildren served as a safeguard or safety net in the midst of injured relationships between biological parents and the grandchildren themselves. When parents were absent or neglected their relationships with their children, the children can depend on trust, entitlement, and understanding of the grandparent, even though this relationship could never replace the parent-child relation. Furthermore, children who experience a lack of trust between themselves and the biological parents because parents were unreliable, irresponsible, or inattentive to the needs of the child seem to result in events portraying destructive entitlement. And from a contextual approach perspective, we know that destructive entitlement occurs especially when those who have committed injustice do not want to acknowledge it or do not try to restore things when there have been injuries in a relation. This destructive entitlement experience in a grandparent-headed family household by children is often not openly directed to the biological parents or the source who does not fulfill the entitlement, but is directed to grandparents or anyone else in immediate surroundings. And the value of relationship between parent and child is often based on trust. And if there is a disruption or breaking of trust, the balance is going to suffer. And so this is a reminder that trust as a resource nourished over time is built by dialogue between family members, and dialogue can also be used as a pastoral care resource when being of assistance and guidance to families. The capacity for therapists or caregivers to tune into a family's trust base or resources by focusing on self-reflective questions can lead to stronger awareness between family members as well, or looking beyond life's challenges and towards building trust for more balanced relationships. So reflective questions or open-ended questions such as, who is trustworthy for you in your family, could evoke more than we really realize. And furthermore, trust-based self-reflective questions or exercises between members of a family can even be directed to the connection between family and the trust in communities. The second relational resource which can serve as a beacon of hope for diverse families is legacy. This is that the transgenerational mandates of certain relationship dynamics may be repeated or inherited both consciously or subconsciously. One's responsibility to preserve generations to come is part of relational realities, especially within families. Legacy is what we receive from past generations. Legacy could be beliefs, customs, religious worldviews, etc. A legacy which is negative, however, in nature is considered a delegation. A legacy is by no means an obligation that needs to be carried out, and it is certainly not the obligation to repeat errors. But legacy passed on to the next generation is an ethical imperative in some sense, in the sense that the present generation is encouraged to determine what is life-affirming for the future generation and to take heed of what is beneficial for the future generation's quality of survival. And so within the democratic South African legacy, it is especially important for people of color and the perception of freedom, liberation and reconciliation within nationality and communities to focus on legacy. To re-establish in certain instances even their identity in their ethnicity. We cannot move forward if we do not realize what has been passed on to us by those who have fought for our racial equality. And we cannot move forward without feeling mandated to working towards making a difference. Thus, legacy can be utilized and emphasized within the family in order to draw closer to an identity handed to you within your family. And in the Cape Flats setting, legacy can be used as a strong tool, especially amongst youth who struggle to feel like they belong. If we can dig deep within our families and we can reach for the things that make us feel like we belong, such as customs or previous worldviews that have strengthened our grandparents or great-grandparents, how would that not help us as youth today? From perhaps stepping away from a candy-coated reality that is seeped out of gangsterism or other habits that occur in our communities. Legacies and shared life lessons between generations also prove to preserve future and reflect on hopes and positive connections between family members. And this was also seen between grandparents, One grandparent stated, "It is the things you cannot buy with money. It is the things that are unseen, like integrity. Your yes should be your yes and your no should be your no. And other things too, like forgiveness and love. The things that are unseen, that is the things I want to leave behind for my children and grandchildren and for the generations to come." Legacy can often serve as a positive form of connection and bond between family members. As perceived from what grandparents had shared concerning legacy, legacy creates a warm sense of trust between grandparents and grandchildren in grandparent-headed families. And so, to close off with, hope is something simple enough for us to gain motivation in every day and complex enough for us to share in research, knowledge and theory. However, as profound as it is for us to sit in spaces and speak on hope, what is most necessary for us as caregivers is to create a hope which can penetrate our lecture halls, therapy rooms, pastoral care spaces to grassroots level of a community which is in need of it the most. And the dialogical intergenerational pastoral process and resources such as trust and legacy are self-generating and sustaining relational resources which can be emphasized and motivated within families at grassroots in order for these families to know that hope is never too far. Their very strength can be found in their relational well-being and family bonds. Because where there is life, there is hope. But more importantly, where there is relational well-being with the other, especially in our immediate homes, there is hope. Thank you.